Welcome to Football Dreams. Tonight we tell the story of Manchester United, a club born in railway yards, built by workers, rebuilt from tragedy, defined by belief. Settle in, let the story unfold, and sleep well. The story begins in smoke and iron. In 1878, Manchester was a city of factories, steam whistles, brick chimneys, the air thick with soot. Workers spent long days building locomotives for the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, and on weekends, they played football. Behind the workshops, on rough ground, they found relief. They formed a team and called it Newton Heath LYR Football Club. The letters stood for the railway company. Their colours were green and gold. They played for pride, not money, not fame, just the love of the game. The fields were muddy, the balls heavy with rain, the goals marked by coats on the grass. But it was theirs, their escape, their identity. By the 1880s, football was spreading across northern England. Every industrial town wanted a team. Every worker wanted to belong. Newton Heath played hard, joined local competitions, and the crowds grew. But money was always a problem. Players paid their own train fares, equipment came out of pocket, the club survived on collections and hope. By 1902, Newton Heath was bankrupt. Debts piled up, creditors circled, the club faced collapse. Then came a stroke of luck. The club captain owned a dog named Major. At a fundraising fair, the dog wandered into the crowd and found its way to a local brewer named John Henry Davies. Davies liked the dog, and he also liked football. When he learnt the club was in trouble, he decided to help. He paid the debts, stabilised the finances, and gave the club a new name. Newton Heath became Manchester United Football Club. A new name, a new hope. The story that nearly ended was given a second life. Football was changing, and Manchester was changing with it. John Henry Davies wasn't just an investor, he was a believer. He wanted a team the whole city could support. He bought new kits, found better players, and the green and gold gave way to red and white. In 1903, Ernest Mangnall arrived as manager. He was disciplined, organised, introduced tactics and structure, and under him, United began to win. By 1906, they were promoted to the First Division. 2 years later, in 1908, they won their first league title. The city took notice, crowds filled the stands, and in 1909, United won the FA Cup, their first major trophy. The victory parade stretched through Manchester, flags hung from windows, and for the workers who had built the club, it was proof that something from their city could reach greatness. In 1910, the club moved to a new stadium, Old Trafford. It was massive, designed to hold 80,000 people, a statement that Manchester United belonged on the biggest stage. But success didn't last. World War I drained the nation. Players left for the front, matches were suspended. By war's end, finances were broken. The 1920s and 30s were hard. United drifted between divisions, sometimes barely surviving. Management changed, players came and went, and the stadium aged. Then came World War II. German bombs fell on Manchester, Old Trafford was hit, fires tore through the stands, and the stadium lay in ruins. United had no home, no money, no clear future. They played at Manchester City's main road, sharing a stadium with their rivals just to stay alive. That's where the story could have ended, but in 1945, a man named Matt Busby walked through the door. He didn't just rebuild the team, he rebuilt the philosophy. When the war ended, Manchester was scarred, buildings in rubble, thousands lost, people looking for something to remind them who they were. Football became that thing. Matt Busby, appointed manager in October 1945, was 36 years old, a former player, thoughtful, devoted to the game. He had fought in the war, seen the cost, and returned believing football had to mean something more. When he arrived, United had almost nothing, no proper stadium, no championship squad, but Busby saw potential. He believed in three things: youth, trust, freedom. He wanted football that flowed, fast, attacking, creative. Not the slow, cautious game of old England, something fresh, alive, joyful. Most of all, Busby wanted the team to be a family. A club is not about buying stars, he said, it's about building them. He brought in Jimmy Murphy as assistant. Together they built a youth system, scouting teenagers from nearby towns, boys from factories and schools. Busby believed the heart of Manchester should beat within the team. It was a gamble, but the city recognized something familiar, that quiet determination. The crowds began to return. United started winning again. They finished second in the league 4 times in Busby's first 5 seasons. Never quite first, but always close. In 1948, they won the FA Cup, their first major trophy under Busby. For a city still healing from war, it was more than victory, it was renewal. Thousands lined the streets. The city smiled again. Busby had given them pride, not just survival, but beauty. Throughout the early 1950s, the youth academy fed new players into the team. Boys who grew up together, trained together, played as one. Duncan Edwards, Tommy Taylor, Roger Byrne, Eddie Coleman, Mark Jones. They weren't just players, they were brothers. The press called them the Busby Babes. By the early 1950s, Manchester United had become something new, a place where youth and imagination were valued over experience and fear. Matt Busby's philosophy was simple: run for each other, trust each other. If one fails, you all fail. The training sessions became famous. No shouting, no panic, just repetition and rhythm. Jimmy Murphy worked tirelessly with the youngsters. They were encouraged to think, to play without fear. By 1955, United fielded a team with an average age of just 21. The press scoffed. Critics said boys couldn't compete with hardened men. The results silenced everyone. The Busby Babes played football England had never seen. Quick, attacking, full of swagger. They didn't just win matches, they transformed them. Crowds at Old Trafford grew every week. People came not only to see victory, but to witness poetry on grass. Duncan Edwards was the heart of the team. At 18, he played with the strength of a man twice his age. Busby once said, "There will never be another like him." Roger Byrne, the captain, was disciplined and calm. Tommy Taylor gave United its edge in front of goal. Eddie Coleman darted through defences with a smile. Together they formed chemistry no amount of money could buy. In 1956, the Babes won the First Division title, the youngest champions in English history, average age just 22. But Busby's ambition didn't stop at England. He looked across Europe. The European Cup was a new competition. The English Football League opposed it. Busby didn't care. He wanted United to test itself against the world. In 1956, United became the first English club to enter the European Cup. It was bold, controversial. The league threatened fines. Busby ignored them. In Europe, the Babes dazzled audiences. Foreign crowds cheered them as if they were their own. The football was fast, fluid, fearless. In 1957, they reached the semi-final. They lost to Real Madrid, but no one saw defeat. They saw destiny. By early 1958, United were at the top of the league, through to the next round of the European Cup. The future seemed infinite. But football, like life, never promises tomorrow. The first week of February 1958 began like any other for Manchester United. The team had just drawn 3-3 in Belgrade against Red Star, securing their place in the European Cup semi-finals. They were tired, bruised, but alive with pride. Europe had embraced them, these young English lads who played with heart, grace, and courage. The return flight was scheduled for the next morning. The mood was high. The players joked on the bus to the airport, teasing each other about missed chances and goals. Duncan Edwards, the team's quiet anchor, wrote a postcard to his landlady back in Manchester before boarding. It said simply, "We're on our way home." The plane, an airspeed ambassador nicknamed Elizabethan, stopped in Munich to refuel. The runway was covered in slush, snow drifting sideways across the tarmac. It was cold, bitterly so. After the first refueling, the pilot, Captain Ken Raymond, attempted to take off. The engines roared, the plane lifted, then failed. He tried again, same result. The players were asked to return to the terminal for coffee and warmth. Matt Busby, always calm, reassured them they'd be home soon. But when the third attempt came, something went wrong. At 3:04 p.m., as the aircraft reached takeoff speed, it hit slush at the end of the runway, failed to lift fully, and skidded off the tarmac. It tore through a fence, across a road, and into a nearby house. The left wing broke, the tail split, the cabin collapsed. There was no explosion, no great fire, just the sound of metal and ice and silence. Inside, chaos. Players thrown from seats, others trapped in wreckage, snow falling through torn metal. The survivors later said the world went quiet, a kind of stillness that felt wrong. 23 people died. 8 of them were Manchester United players: Roger Byrne, Tommy Taylor, Duncan Edwards, Eddie Coleman, Mark Jones, David Pegg, Jeff Bent, Liam Whelan. Busby was critically injured, his chest crushed, ribs broken. He drifted in and out of consciousness, asking one question over and over: what about the boys? Jimmy Murphy, his assistant, had stayed behind in Cardiff managing the reserves. When the news reached him, he froze. He didn't believe it, couldn't. But when he arrived in Munich, the reality hit. His team, his family, was gone. Back in Manchester, the city fell silent. Shops closed, crowds gathered outside Old Trafford waiting for news. Newspapers sold out within minutes, radios stayed on all night, people listening in disbelief. It wasn't just a club's tragedy, it was a national heartbreak. These were young men, symbols of post-war hope, suddenly gone in the snow. Duncan Edwards fought for 15 days in hospital before succumbing to his injuries. He was 21. Busby later said losing him was like losing a son. The funerals filled the streets. Tens of thousands lined the pavements as hearses moved slowly through Manchester. Flags draped, scarves hung on gates, children on shoulders watching in silence. The air was cold, but people stayed for hours, not because they were fans, but because they felt the loss as their own. At Old Trafford, the seats remained empty for weeks. There was talk of the club folding. How could they carry on without players, without Busby, without hope? But something remarkable happened. Jimmy Murphy refused to let the club die. While Busby lay in hospital, Murphy took charge. He rebuilt a temporary team from reserves, youth players, and borrowed men from other clubs. They played again just 13 days after the crash. FA Cup, 5th round, against Sheffield Wednesday. No one expected anything, they just wanted the game to go ahead. For the fallen, United won 3-0. People wept in the stands. It wasn't victory, it was survival. When Matt Busby heard the result from his hospital bed, he later said it was that match and Jimmy Murphy's courage that made him decide to live. He told his wife, "If they can start again, so can I." Months later, when he returned to Old Trafford, he wept. The dressing room was quiet. The names were missing. The laughter was gone, but the walls still echoed their memory. Munich wasn't the end of Manchester United. It was the moment that defined it. From that night onward, every player who wore red would carry the same promise, that no matter what happened, they would never let the dream die. In the months after Munich, Manchester United was a ghost of itself. The offices were silent. Photographs of the lost boys hung on walls with black ribbons across the frames. But amid the grief, a handful of men refused to let the silence win. Jimmy Murphy became the heartbeat. While Busby fought for his life, Murphy assembled a team from whatever remained. He pulled players from reserves, called in favours, asked for loan signings. Most said yes. Even rivals offered help. Because Munich wasn't just a football tragedy, it was a human one. On February 19th, just 13 days after the crash, United played Sheffield Wednesday in the FA Cup. The lineup was patched together, inexperienced, grieving. No one expected victory. But when the players stepped out, 60,000 stood in silence, scarves raised, tears falling. When the whistle blew, those makeshift players played the match of their lives. They won 3-0. It wasn't a miracle, it was defiance. Murphy carried them all the way to the FA Cup final that year. They lost to Bolton, but no one cared about the score. The act of standing there at Wembley was enough. Meanwhile, Matt Busby slowly healed. Doctors told him he might never walk again. His injuries were severe, but his will was harder than steel. When he finally returned to Manchester, the city treated it like a resurrection. Crowds gathered at the station. He looked older, thinner, haunted, but alive. And in his eyes burned quiet fury. He had lost his team, nearly his life, but not his belief. Busby made a promise. Manchester United would rise again, not as tribute, but as proof that tragedy couldn't erase greatness. He threw himself into rebuilding. Bobby Charlton, one of the Munich survivors, became the bridge between past and future. Busby signed Dennis Law, and in 1963 the club won the FA Cup. It wasn't the league title, it wasn't Europe, but it was a beginning. The city celebrated in relief. For 5 years they had lived under shadow. Now something was blooming again. By the mid-1960s, the youth system thrived once more. Players trained with purpose. Every match at Old Trafford was played not just for points, but for memory. From the ashes of Munich, something unbreakable had emerged, a spirit that would carry the club through generations. And in the shadows of the stands, Busby would sometimes stand alone, watching, breathing the cold air, never smiling for long. But in those quiet moments, he must have known. The boys he lost were still here, in every cheer, in every goal, in every heart that refused to stop beating. By the mid-1960s, Manchester United had risen from grief into glory. The club was no longer wounded, it was powerful. At the centre stood 3 men, each different, each brilliant. Bobby Charlton was the soul, a Munich survivor who played every game as though honouring ghosts. His passing was clean, his goals purposeful, his words few but meaningful. Dennis Law was fire, competitive, fierce, a predator in the box. Every goal was a declaration that Manchester United would not just exist, but dominate. And then there was George Best, The artist. He was the kind of player that comes once in a lifetime. Fast, fearless, magnetic. His dribbling was hypnotic. Defenders looked foolish chasing him. Off the pitch, he had film star looks and effortless swagger. The Beatles haircut that made him a cultural icon. Best wasn't just the best player in England, he was the first modern football celebrity. Busby knew what he had and built around them carefully. He didn't try to control their individuality, he gave it structure. Charlton's composure, Law's aggression, Best's creativity. Together they became unstoppable. Crowds could feel it. Every Saturday at Old Trafford was an event. Families came early just to see Best warming up. Kids tried to copy his moves in alleyways. Reporters ran out of superlatives. Maradona good, Pelé better, George best, that's how one headline put it. Few argued. But beneath the glamour was something deeper. The club had transformed tragedy into triumph. Busby's philosophy, faith in youth, fearless football, had carried United back to the summit. In 1965, United won the First Division title. They won it again in 1967. The trophies validated everything, but the real victory was emotional. Busby had done the impossible. And then, in 1968, the circle closed. That May, at Wembley Stadium, Manchester United faced Benfica in the European Cup final. It was the moment Busby had dreamed of since the 1950s. The trophy his first team had died chasing. For 90 minutes, the game hung in balance. United led, Benfica equalised. The whistle blew for extra time. Then, everything clicked. Charlton scored again, his second of the night. Then George Best danced past the Benfica defence, rounded the goalkeeper, and rolled the ball into an empty net. The stadium erupted. 2 more goals followed, Brian Kidd, another youth product, and Charlton once more. When the final whistle sounded, Manchester United were champions of Europe. 10 years after Munich, the dream fulfilled. On the pitch, Busby walked slowly among his players, eyes glassy, expression unreadable. For a long time he said nothing. Then, quietly, "It's been a long road from Munich." That night the celebrations weren't wild, they were reverent. For Busby, for the lost boys, for every soul that had carried the club through the storm. The next morning the papers didn't just celebrate victory, they celebrated redemption. The headline in the Manchester Evening News read, "United win the cup for the babes." Busby would retire a few years later, his legacy carved in steel and spirit. He had turned pain into purpose, tragedy into triumph. And the Holy Trinity, Charlton, Law and Best, had shown the world that beauty, courage and resilience could coexist in one team. Old Trafford had witnessed resurrection. The city had seen history heal itself. And somewhere, in the echoes of that night, it was easy to believe that the Busby babes were there too. Watching from beyond the floodlights, smiling through the rain, their dream finally complete. By the early 1980s, the glow of Busby's empire had faded. The Holy Trinity had retired. The magic of the 60s was a memory. Old Trafford still stood tall, but the echoes had grown quieter. Managers came and went. Wilf McGuinness, Franco Farrell, Tommy Docherty, Dave Sexton, Ron Atkinson. Each tried to rekindle what Busby had built. Each fell short. The club wasn't poor in players or in pride, but it lacked something invisible: belief. Manchester United had history but no direction, a giant wandering without a compass. Then, in November 1986, a new name was announced. A tough, straight-talking Scot from Aberdeen, Alex Ferguson. To most fans, he wasn't the saviour. He was an unknown quantity. A manager from the Scottish League who had beaten Real Madrid and Bayern Munich with a provincial team. Impressive, yes, but this was Manchester United. The scale was different. The expectation was suffocating. When Ferguson arrived, he saw a club that had grown complacent. Players were comfortable, training was lax, discipline was soft. He didn't care about reputation or politics, he cared about standards. From the start, he demanded everything. No drinking, no excuses, no shortcuts. He pushed hard, too hard, some said. Results didn't come quickly. In his first 3 seasons, the team struggled. There were banners calling for his sacking, jeers from the terraces, headlines that read, "Time's up, Fergie," but Ferguson didn't flinch. He understood that change, real change, takes time. He wasn't building a team, he was rebuilding a culture. He studied Busby's history, he understood the weight of the badge. He told players, "You play for the name on the front of the shirt and they'll remember the one on the back." By 1990, the first signs of life appeared. United won the FA Cup, their first major trophy in years. It wasn't just silverware, it was oxygen. The club could breathe again. Ferguson's philosophy echoed Busby's. Trust youth, build identity, demand total commitment. In 1992, that belief bore fruit. A group of academy graduates, later known as the Class of '92, began breaking into the first team. David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, Gary Neville, Phil Neville, local lads, just like the Busby babes once were. Ferguson didn't protect them from pressure, he threw them into the fire. Critics called it madness. Alan Hansen famously said on television, "You'll never win anything with kids." He couldn't have been more wrong. Those kids went on to dominate English football for a decade. They played with energy, unity, confidence, qualities that had defined United since Busby's time. Ferguson had revived the DNA of the club, blending history with modernity. Under his leadership, United became relentless. They didn't just want to win, they expected to. Every match was a test of mentality. Every training session was a battle. Ferguson's famous hairdryer treatment, his volcanic dressing room outbursts, became part of football folklore. But the players who lasted under him were those who understood. It wasn't cruelty, it was care. He demanded the best because he believed they could give it. In 1993, Manchester United finally lifted the Premier League, their first top-flight title in 26 years. The drought was over, the city erupted. Fans flooded the streets, climbing lampposts, waving flags, singing the same songs that had echoed through the decades. It felt like destiny, a second rebirth. But Ferguson wasn't finished. He didn't just want success, he wanted dominance. Over the next decade, United became the benchmark for excellence in world football. They won title after title, cup after cup. Ferguson evolved with the times, new tactics, new players, new rivalries. But one thing never changed, the emphasis on spirit, on hunger, on youth. In the press room, when asked how he kept the fire alive, Ferguson replied, "It's Manchester United. The day we stop fighting is the day we stop being Manchester United." By the late 1990s, the club wasn't just winning, it was defining an era. Rivals admired them, others despised them, but no one ignored them. The red shirt once again carried the same gravity it had under Busby, a symbol of resilience and belief. In the hearts of the fans, a quiet parallel formed. Busby had built the dream, Ferguson was ensuring it would never die. And just like before, the story wasn't finished, because Manchester United was about to achieve something no English team had ever done before. By 1999, Manchester United had become more than a football club. It was an institution, a global emblem of drive, resilience and ambition. Alex Ferguson's men had already conquered England time and again, but the Scotsman wasn't satisfied with dominance. He wanted immortality. That season, United set out to achieve what no English team had ever done before, to win the treble, the Premier League, the FA Cup and the UEFA Champions League in the same year. It sounded impossible, too many matches, too much pressure. Yet to Ferguson's squad, impossibility was the point. The team was a mixture of experience and youth, raw pace and steely control. Schmeichel, the giant in goal, Stam and Johnson in defence, disciplined and unyielding, Keane, the heartbeat, ferocious and uncompromising, Giggs, Beckham, Scholes, York and Cole, footballers at their creative peak. Each game that season felt like an act of defiance against fatigue, doubt and history. They fought through injuries, late goals and relentless fixtures. They never quit, not once. The league campaign went down to the wire. Arsenal were relentless rivals, breathing down United's necks, but Ferguson's men found a way, grinding out results, clawing points from the jaws of defeat. They clinched the Premier League title on the final day, exhausted, ecstatic, and still not done. Days later, they faced Newcastle United in the FA Cup final. Without breaking stride, they won 2-0, 2 trophies in 1 week. But the biggest one, the one that would define their legacy, still waited. The date, May 26, 1999. The venue, Camp Nou, Barcelona. The opponent, Bayern Munich. The Champions League final. It was meant to be a night of football. It became a night of mythology. United entered the match without their captain, Roy Keane, and midfield general Paul Scholes, both suspended. Bayern Munich, disciplined and ruthless, took control early. In the 6th minute, a deflected free kick from Mario Basler slipped past Peter Schmeichel. 1-0, Bayern. The Germans controlled the game from there. They hit the post, they hit the bar, they defended like a wall. As the clock ticked past 85 minutes, United looked beaten. The fans sang louder, desperate. Ferguson paced the touchline, jaw set, eyes fixed on the field. He made 2 substitutions, Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. 2 strikers, one nearing the end of his career, one just beginning his legend. 90 minutes. The 4th official raised the board, 3 minutes added on. Then, chaos. Beckham whipped in a corner. The ball bounced off a defender, fell to Sheringham, who swept it into the net. 1-1. Old Trafford was thousands of miles away, but you could almost feel it shake. 30 seconds later, another corner. Beckham again. This time, Sheringham flicked it on, and Solskjaer's boot met it perfectly. 2-1. The net bulged. The world stopped. Solskjaer sprinted away, arms outstretched, disbelief on his face. The bench erupted. Ferguson punched the air. The players collapsed in a pile of joy, exhaustion, and awe. Bayern's players fell to the ground, shattered. The final whistle blew moments later. Manchester United, against all reason, all logic, were champions of Europe. 3 trophies, 1 season, the treble. It had taken 91 years since Newton Heath's first game, 41 since Munich, and 33 since Busby's European triumph, but the club had finally achieved perfection. After the match, Ferguson stood before the cameras, red-eyed and grinning. He was asked how he'd done it. He simply said, "Football, bloody hell." That line became legend because it wasn't arrogance, it was awe. Even he couldn't quite believe it. In Manchester, the celebrations lasted for days. Flags over bridges, fans on rooftops, car horns through the night. The treble wasn't just a sporting achievement, it was a statement that Manchester United, the club born from factories and rebuilt from tragedy, could touch the impossible. That season sealed Ferguson's place beside Busby. 2 Scots, decades apart, bound by the same vision. That football was more than a game. It was a reflection of life itself, brutal, beautiful, unpredictable, and worth every second. And as the team lifted the trophy under the Spanish night, the echoes of Munich were there, not as pain, but as presence, a promise kept, a dream completed. After 1999, Manchester United stood alone at the summit of world football. The treble had not only made history, it had redefined what excellence looked like. But for Alex Ferguson, success was never a destination. It was a habit. He didn't let his players linger on glory. He knew complacency was the slow death of greatness. Winning 1 title means nothing, he told them. Winning again, that's what makes you Manchester United. And they did. The early 2000s became a golden stretch of dominance. United swept up league titles, domestic cups, European runs with the ruthless consistency of a machine. They didn't always play the most beautiful football. Sometimes it was gritty, even ugly. But Ferguson's teams had one trait that outlasted talent: refusal to lose. The old guard evolved into mentors. Giggs and Scholes aged like iron, outlasting entire generations of opponents. Beckham became a global icon, balancing celebrity with precision football. When he left for Real Madrid in 2003, it marked the end of an era. But Ferguson had already planned the next one. He rebuilt again. He always rebuilt. New faces arrived. Cristiano Ronaldo, a wiry teenager from Portugal with a bag of tricks and a relentless drive to prove himself. Wayne Rooney, the working-class prodigy from Liverpool with thunder in his boots. Rio Ferdinand, elegant and composed at the back. Nemanja Vidic, a wall of resolve beside him. Together they formed a new United, faster, sharper, modern. Football itself was changing, becoming global, televised everywhere. Ferguson adapted effortlessly. He managed egos, media storms, and the changing face of the game without ever losing the locker room. By 2008, the Red Empire was roaring again. That spring, United reached another Champions League final, this time in Moscow against Chelsea. Rain poured down, the pitch turned slick. It was a tense, nerve-wracking match that went to penalties. John Terry, Chelsea's captain, had the chance to win it and slipped. Moments later, Edwin van der Sar saved the final spot kick from Anelka. Manchester United were champions of Europe again. 9 years after the treble, Ferguson had built another team capable of conquering the continent. That night, drenched in rain, Ferguson hugged Ronaldo and Rooney and smiled, a rare, unguarded smile. He'd done what few managers in history ever could, built 2 dynasties within the same club. The trophies kept coming, 11 Premier League titles in 13 seasons. But Ferguson's real achievement wasn't the silverware. It was the continuity, the sense that no matter how football changed, no matter the money, the media, the madness, Manchester United still played with the same spirit Busby had imagined decades before. By the early 2000s, though, time was catching up. Ferguson was nearing 70. Critics wondered how long he could keep fighting battles against younger managers, faster systems, global juggernauts like Chelsea and Manchester City. He answered the only way he knew how: by winning. In 2013, United clinched their 20th league title. Ferguson lifted the trophy at Old Trafford before a sea of red flags and teary fans. It was his final act. After 26 years as manager, he announced his retirement. When the news broke, the city froze for a moment. It felt like a parent leaving home. For an entire generation, Ferguson was Manchester United. At his farewell speech, his voice cracked as he stood before 70,000 fans. "I've had the privilege of managing some of the greatest players and the privilege of you, the supporters. My retirement doesn't mean the end. The club will go on. Your job now is to stand by the next manager." It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a reminder of continuity, that Manchester United was larger than any man, even him. When he walked down the tunnel for the last time, applause rolled through the stands like thunder. The banners read, "Thank you, Sir Alex." Underneath the stands, in a quiet hallway, Ferguson paused and looked at a black and white photograph of Matt Busby. For a moment, two legacies seemed to overlap. Two Scotsmen who had given their lives to one idea, that Manchester United could endure anything. He smiled, almost to himself, and kept walking. The empire he built would face new challenges, new uncertainties, but the foundation was unbreakable, because Manchester United's greatest triumph wasn't a trophy or a season. It was the belief that no matter who came or went, no matter how the world changed, the spirit of the club, that hunger, that resilience, that refusal to die, would always remain. And for one last time, as the lights dimmed over Old Trafford, the old manager turned, waved, and whispered the words every fan already knew: "The dream never ends." After Ferguson's farewell in 2013, the air around Old Trafford felt strange, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. For 26 years, one man had been the constant, the architect, the authority, the father figure. Now without him, Manchester United stood in uncharted territory. Ferguson's successor, David Moyes, walked into an impossible job. He was chosen by Ferguson himself, the hand-picked heir. But inheriting a kingdom isn't the same as ruling it. The standards were unreal, the players were weary, and the shadow of Ferguson loomed over every match, every press conference, every substitution. Moyes lasted less than a season. The football wasn't bad whilst it was directionless, and for the first time in decades, Manchester United looked ordinary. What followed was a decade of turbulence, a club trying to rediscover its soul in a football world that had changed faster than it could adapt. Managers came with pedigrees, promises and philosophies. Louis van Gaal, the tactician with a resume full of silverware. Jose Mourinho, the self-proclaimed special one who brought swagger and fire. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the hero of 1999, tasked with reviving the spirit of youth and belief. Each brought moments of hope, and each in time fell short of expectation. The game had changed. Money had become louder than identity. Clubs owned by billionaires and nation-states were reshaping the landscape. Transfer fees broke records, players became brands. And in this new age, United's greatest strength, its heritage, began to feel like both armor and anchor. Fans grew restless. Critics spoke of a lost philosophy, but the truth was more complicated. Manchester United was evolving, unevenly, painfully, but inevitably. Amid the chaos, there were flashes of what once made the club special. Moments when Old Trafford's roar sounded like the old days, when academy graduates like Marcus Rashford, Scott McTominay, and Alejandro Garnacho ran with the same hunger that the Busby babes once did, when nights under the floodlights still felt sacred even if the stakes weren't the same. The club's commercial rise continued regardless. United remained one of the most recognized brands in world sport, shirts sold in every continent, sponsors queuing for a piece of the crest. But beneath the marketing machine, the soul still pulsed, quietly, stubbornly. The years brought their share of triumphs, an FA Cup, a League Cup, a Europa League, but they felt like echoes rather than crescendos. Fans longed not just for trophies, but for identity, for football that meant something again. And yet, through all the noise, the managerial changes, the ownership debates, the tactical overhauls, the club never lost its heartbeat. The stands were still full, the songs were still sung, the legacy of belief was still intact. Every generation of United fans inherits the same paradox, pride and pain intertwined. They remember Munich, Busby, Best, Ferguson. They remember the roar when Solskjaer scored in 1999. And they hold those memories against the frustration of modern times, waiting, always waiting, for the next era of meaning. But perhaps that's what Manchester United truly is. Not a timeline of victories, but a continuum of spirit. The young players still dream of becoming part of that lineage. The next Charlton, the next Giggs, the next hero who'll make a child believe again. The fans still gather in pubs, in homes across continents wearing the same red that's been worn since 1902. They still believe in comebacks. They still believe in fight. And if you walk through Old Trafford on a match day, past the bronze statue of the Holy Trinity, past the memorial clock fixed forever at 3:04, the moment the plane crashed in Munich, you'll feel it. That hum, that energy, that whisper through the bricks. Manchester United is not just a club. It's a story told over a century, through triumph and tragedy, through men who built something that outlived them all. Even now in uncertain times, the story isn't over. It never will be. Because United's greatness has never just been about winning, it's about refusing to stop trying. And somewhere, in the stands, a child watches the red shirts take the field, not yet knowing the history, not yet understanding the weight, but feeling something stir, something ancient and electric. That's how the story begins again. If you trace it all back, through the banners and songs, through the legends and the heartbreaks, Manchester United has always been more than a club. It's a story that refuses to end. It began in smoke and steel, a group of railwaymen playing for pride, not glory. It grew through survival, through poverty, war and tragedy. And it endured because every generation found someone new to carry the flame. From the muddy yards of Newton Heath to the marble halls of Old Trafford, United's story has always been about defiance, the refusal to accept that anything is truly over. When the club was broke, they found a patron. When the stadium burned, they rebuilt it. When the team was lost in Munich, they rose again. When Ferguson retired, they kept believing. The details change, the faces change, but the meaning stays the same. It's there in the way a crowd still sings, "We'll keep the red flag flying high." It's there in the way a teenager still dreams of scoring in front of the Stretford end. It's there in the empty seats hours before kickoff, reserved, waiting, as if the ghosts themselves might still be watching. For over a century, Manchester United has embodied something rare in sport, the fusion of struggle and beauty. A club that was never supposed to be perfect, only eternal. Every trophy ever lifted came at the cost of pain. Every era of greatness was built from something broken. And maybe that's why people love them, because United's story mirrors their own. Life knocks you down, you rebuild, you keep going, you believe again. That belief is the real inheritance. When fans talk about the Busby babes, they don't speak with pity, they speak with pride, because those boys didn't die for fame or fortune, they played for joy, for the purity of the game. When they remember George Best, they don't dwell on the chaos, they remember the grace, the way he made football look like art. When they remember Ferguson, they remember the fire, the relentless pursuit of standards, of identity, of purpose. And together these moments form the spine of a mythology that no amount of money or modernity can erase. And yet, the club's future, like its past, will always belong to those who believe, the fans who travel thousands of miles, the kids in scarves too big for their necks, the veterans who remember the days when the pitch was mud and the wages were coins. They are all chapters in the same unfinished book. The stadium itself has become a monument. The Munich clock stands as a reminder of what was lost and of what survived. Every February, supporters gather beneath it, scarves around necks, voices trembling as they sing the flowers of Manchester. It's not nostalgia, it's remembrance, the purest kind of loyalty. Football has changed, the world has changed. But in the roar that greets kickoff, in the gasp that follows a goal, in the hum that fills the air after the final whistle, something ancient still moves through Old Trafford. It's the same spirit that guided the first team bus through the fog 100 years ago. The same hope that whispered to Matt Busby as he stood in Munich, wondering if he could ever begin again. The same fire that burned in Ferguson's eyes as he built a new dynasty from nothing but faith and fury. That's what Manchester United is, a reminder that greatness isn't a moment, it's a mindset. And though the years will bring more defeats, more rebuilds, more heartbreaks, the dream endures. It always will. Because every time the red shirts step onto the pitch, under floodlights or rain, before old fans and new, they're not just playing a game, they're continuing a story that began in 1878, written in sweat, rebuilt in sorrow, and carried forward by belief. The names may change, the world may spin faster, but the anthem remains, "Glory, glory, Man United." And as long as that song echoes, somewhere in Manchester, in a stadium, a pub, a child's room, or a whisper in the wind, the legacy lives, not as a club, not as a brand, but as a dream that no tragedy, no defeat, no time can ever silence. Thank you for dreaming with us tonight. The story of Manchester United, born in railway yards, rebuilt from tragedy, carried forward by belief. Subscribe for more club histories and sleep well.